So this presentation, Responding to Disasters, a Trauma-Informed Approach with Robin Brady, Farhana Karim and myself, Jessica Sullivan, is being recorded today on December the 22nd, 2020. And we would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land and pay our respects to elders past and present, and also extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people listening today. We acknowledge that this is Aboriginal land, it always was and it always will be. So now I will pass over to Farhana, who will be running this interview, and we'll go from there. Farhana.
Thanks, Jess. Now, before we jump into the content, we want to provide a kind of trigger warning for this session. Robin, can you explain what we mean by this?
Okay, so we're about to be talking about dealing with traumatic incidences, and we were careful that we don't speak about things that trigger people to memories that they may have. However, we can't control that because you don't know what your own triggers are until they go off. So just be aware that there may be some content that triggers you. If so, just turn the audio off, gather yourself and ground yourself, and if you feel you can come back and join us, do so. Or watch this at another time. But keep yourself safe listening to this, and we're going to try very hard not to talk about too much that's traumatic, so hopefully that won't happen.
Thanks, Robin. So before we begin, could you please tell us a bit about your background and working within the trauma-informed space and with Legal Aid New South Wales?
Okay, yeah, thanks, Farhana. I've just ticked over 41 years as a mental health accredited social worker. I started my working life as a residential youth worker for the Anglican Church, where I picked up the unfortunate habit of swearing, actually, which I'll try not to do today. I worked for a long time in both adult and child sexual assault in hospitals that I worked in, and also in the hand unit at Sydney Hospital that does hand trauma after major industrial accidents and so on. And I also worked on the Kennedy bus crash, and I worked in the 1992 bushfires in Sydney as well. So I've worked closely with the New South Wales Coroner's Office over the years, and then for the last many years I've been very involved with legal aid. I think I've been training for you guys for about 20 years now, and I also work with a lot of the community legal centres, particularly working in immigration and refugee space. So I've had a fair bit to do with trauma and working with all sorts of people coming at all sorts of different angles. So that's me.
Thank you for that, Robin. What we wanted to do is divide this session into two parts. So the first part is trauma-informed practice. What does it look like? Why do we do it? And specifically in the context of disasters. We'll be looking at the best way to approach disaster-impacted clients, which doesn't add or further traumatise them. The second part of this session will be Robin will be talking to you about looking after yourself when providing legal services to disaster-affected clients, whether you're working at a disaster recovery centre or another venue or via phone. Now, I'm sure we'll jump around a bit during this session, but that's going to be our general structure for today's session. So, Robin, let's start with understanding what trauma is and how it impacts the way people live their lives and their functioning capacity.
Okay, so trauma comes from our experience of being a very vulnerable creature in a very dangerous world, and we've developed a fear centre in our brain that's designed to make us respond when we're in danger. And it comes out of our right brain and is triggered by a part of the brain called the amygdala. That once our brain perceives we're in a position of threat, so in the sense of natural disasters, we smell smoke, or we see waters rising, or somebody with a large object is coming in our direction, our fear centre turns on automatically without our permission, and basically takes over our brain to meet the response. And you may have heard of the fight, flight, fright response that is triggered in people at that point. That response is designed in the brain to last for about 3 minutes, which in the past has traditionally been the time it's taken to deal with the threat. And it's a pretty full-on one. It's physiological. Your brain pumps out chemicals that get your heart rate up, puts adrenaline into your system so everything's chugging, puts cortisol into your system that stops your pancreas from turning insulin into sugar and keeps it as sugar, so you've got something to fight with, and just gets you ready to meet the threat. And that stays on for as long as your brain thinks you are in danger, and keeps pumping those chemicals. And then the danger either passes and you're okay, and it switches off, or it doesn't, and you're not here anymore. So problem over, really. So the most important thing to get about trauma, a trauma response, is if it's a normal one, it's driven by your brain and it's involuntary. Now, what's happened with humans is that we've complicated this a bit, because we have a brain that can remember bad things that have happened to us and other people, and can worry about bad things that haven't happened yet. And we've learnt in the last 15 years or so that the thought is the same as the activity to the brain. So unlike every other creature on the planet, we can turn our fear center on by remembering something bad that we heard about, saw, or were involved in, or by worrying about something that hasn't happened yet. And we get that same fear response as if we're actually in that situation. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. That's an excellent description.
I think that's the basic trauma response, and the trauma-informed response starts with understanding that, so that we understand what's going on in our mind when we're dealing with clients who've been traumatized, and what's already gone on in the minds of the clients who are telling us their story. And in the case of vicarious trauma, where we come together, that's where it can become tricky for us listening to other people's distressing stories. Because as they're telling it, they're reliving it and remembering it as if it happened, and they're getting traumatized all over again. And as we're listening to it, if we're listening to it properly and with proper care and empathy, then our brain's getting alarmed by what's happening to them. And that's essentially what vicarious trauma is, rather than post-traumatic stress disorder, which is to do with the primary response. And those of us who work with people who've been through the primary thing get the vicarious response.
Excellent. Thank you, Robin. Before we move on to talk about how to work with and engage with people at disaster recovery centres, for example, can you tell me how trauma may present or affect people differently in the context of disasters?
Okay, well, it depends a bit on what the person's individual experience has been, but also their previous experience. So generally speaking, actually, in the area of natural disasters, as much as they are really distressing, because we don't blame anyone for them happening, people don't respond with as much anger at those. They just get on with trying to deal with the situation that's happening. But where it's a trauma that another person is doing something to us, that's a different context. But basically, your choices in any kind of trauma situation is fight, flight, or freeze. So some people do get out there and fight the fires, or get out there and do the sandbagging in the case of the floods, and they're busy doing that. They're not thinking about doing that. They might be actively rescuing other people, rescuing pets and animals around, and so on. Other people just freeze, and others have to kind of remove them from the situation because they can't make a choice that's happening at that time. And other people can sometimes faint or even just lose cognitive function during that time. And the important thing to remember when listening to the client's description of which one they didn't have any choice about it. And not one of them is a sign of weakness. It's just what their brain figured they needed to do at that time. And it's a normal thing that comes based on their previous experience. So if they've had previous bad experiences, that can make it harder for them to act. But also, if they've had previous bad experiences, they know how to act. So, and that varies from client to client as well.
Can I jump in there? What would you say are the most frequent responses to a disaster, Robin?
Well, the most typical feature about them is that there's not a lot of thinking. Like people just find themselves doing something. They're either running one way or the other. People often describe screaming and hearing screaming, thinking someone else is doing it. But yeah, most people run to it or run away from it, and all dependent on how close it is and how major the threat is and their previous experience. And of course, if they've had military training or police training, they're trained to run to it. But interestingly, even in that case, we know back as far as World War I that over 60% of the soldiers who were in that war didn't fire their guns in their first battle because they didn't want to shoot the enemy and they froze. So it's not natural for us to fight unless we see no other option. The most logical thing puny human beings do is run away from it. or go and make themselves very small and hope it will go over them. And in the case of big threats like fires, that's what most people do.
Thanks, Robin. So what are some of the ways that solicitors can engage with clients in a trauma-informed way?
Okay, well, the first thing is to just engage with the person as a genuine human being who's actually also been in a loss situation. We emphasise the trauma, but most of the traumas we're talking about, your team's dealing with, also involve great loss for people in terms of property and animals and stock and so on. So you engage them very respectfully. Explain your role to them as quickly as possible, because quite often people come to support centres not knowing what it is they're going to get from you. So if you go, okay, hi, good to meet you. You've come here today. What are you needing from us today? And try and find out what their agenda is. And then tell them what you can do. Okay, great. Yes, I can help you with that part of it. But for this side of it, I'll probably need to give you a referral to someone else. So you very quickly engage in setting what it is they wish to speak to you about. In some of the trauma-informed models, they suggest that you might actually invite the people to speak, to say, okay, you've come here today, I'm ready to listen when you're ready to tell me what's been happening. And to then just pay very careful attention to see what they start with. Give responses so that they know that you're listening, just the minimal ones, the hms and ahas, tell me more, and just listen to see what they give you first up, to give you an idea of where you need to take it from there.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you another question that's a little bit similar to what I've just asked, but just want to make it a bit more practical. So in terms of if you've got a traumatized client, they're sitting in front of you, they're quite elevated, extremely upset, crying. What's the best way to address someone who's in that state, sitting in front of you when you're about to give them some legal advice?
Okay, so there's a few suggestions. One is actually just not be alarmed by that and just expect that's the territory, and try and get yourself as grounded and as calm before you have this interaction that you can do. So I would suggest that you try, where possible, to have breaks in between clients in this kind of setting. Adopt for yourself a good upright position in which your back is straight and you're getting air into your lungs and up to your brain, so you stay calm. But then you might need to do a thing called mechanical rapport, where you might just need to raise your voice as loud as theirs for a couple of words and then drop yours down to get their brain's attention and continue the conversation at a volume that's more helpful for both of you. If they stand up and they're moving around, then just stand up and join them for a minute and then come and sit again. So the idea is to just try and match their posture and their tone and their distress quickly and then move it to a calmer one. And the other thing is to just normalise that response, just say, give them indications that must have been terrible. I'm so sorry you've been through that, and mean it, obviously. And then fairly quickly try to move to what part of it you can help them with today. So even literally pick up your pen and go for dates, times and places, because that actually takes them into left brain. And in order to retrieve those details for you, they calm down naturally. And then you can work out what facts you're dealing with and, what your role is here. And that's the other thing I'd say, is stay very firmly in role, even if you're from the local community or you might even know these people. For this conversation, you're representing legal aid, you're there to offer a service, and that role keeps you calmer and keeps you with a better idea of how to guide the conversation. And that in turn keeps them calmer. And then you can just guide them through the conversation, gathering the information that you need. Steering them away from the information you don't need, and we can talk a bit more about that if you like, and keeping them able to tell you their story so that they can then get the assistance they need.
Okay. How would you navigate that situation where you've got a client who's telling you quite graphic details? So it can be traumatizing for them. Yep. To tell their story and to tell it over and over. Yep. We're probably not the first professional they've spoken to or the last. And also, how do we navigate that and protect ourselves? I guess we're going to go into that shortly. So maybe we can talk about how we navigate that when we're speaking to the client to help them not get traumatized again.
Yeah, well, you raise a really important point, which is that we sometimes wrongly think that we just have to let them go and then they'll calm down. But there's actually a term from the brain science called neural kindling. The more they talk about it without getting a result from it, the hotter it gets in their brain and the harder it is for them to stay calm. And also, of course, you then are picking up a lot of detail that's going to distress you, that's going to be stuck in your brain after the situation that you can't do anything about. So somewhat counterintuitively, we actually have to reserve for ourselves the right to perhaps interrupt them or talk over the top of them to get them to stop. If it's getting into really gory details, we need to go, actually, I need to stop you there. Obviously, a lot that's happened is horrible. Let me come back to what I can help you with here. And then when we're finished here, let's get you some referrals to counsellors to deal with the rest of that. And if you've got them physically in front of you, again, literally put your hand up to give the stop signal. If you're over the phone, you're going to have to kind of raise your voice a bit to get that through. But the trick with that is that if you're actually not feeling guilty about doing that and you do it calmly, they're grateful to stop doing that, but they're having a bit of trouble stopping their own neural kindling, and they will regret it if you let them go on for too long, and it will increase the risk of injury to you as the worker if you let it go on for too long. So deal yourself in and understand that it's not mean to the client to cut off terribly gory details, because they've just made it worse in their brain, and now you've got it. You might need to talk to a colleague about it and they'll get it, and we'll just all pass it down the chain, which really doesn't do anybody any good. So it's not mean to cut them off, so long as you do it politely, but reasonably firmly, and then redirect to the bit of the story you can help them with. And usually, again, do that thing of going to left brain. What was the timing of this? Who else was there? What day was that? Do your lawyer thing of gathering your information. And actually just watch how quickly it calms them down, because they've literally got to go into left brain to do that. And they come away from the narrative that's making them more uncomfortable and more distressed.
Excellent. So what I got from that is that it's really important to maintain some very clear boundaries.
Yep.
And at the same time, do that with compassion.
Totally. That's a really good summary. And the best thing we can do for the client in this situation, in your roles, is do our job. And the best way we can protect both them and us from being distressed is to keep it in process. So they will, and half the clients you'll be dragging information out of, and the other half you'll be struggling to shut up, because that's the way it goes. There are two kinds of people in the world: emoters, who love to tell their story, and repressors, who we feels like we're drawing teeth getting information out of them. And we go very gently with the latter kind. But we need to get that. It's now been proven that even for the emoters, contrary to popular opinion, they're not getting benefit from the constant retelling of the story. And they'll get much more benefit from you being able to guide them to what they need to do process-wise, how you can assist them, and what they're eligible for. And that calms you both down, keeps it on track, and is the greatest defence against vicarious trauma is you're using your technical skill to respond to the client. There are plenty of people who can do the counselling side of things, and it would be helpful if people had listed those phone numbers and knew where to find those people, so you can actually say to the client, obviously you need to have a longer conversation about that. That's not what I can help you with today, but before you leave here today, I'm going to give you some phone numbers or help you make that contact. But what I can do for you today is this, and that keeps it safer for both.
Excellent. Thank you, Robin. So now we're going to move on to the second part of this training. So just as important as it is to engage with our clients from a trauma-informed perspective and to reduce any further traumatization, it's just as important to look after ourselves while we do the work.
Yep.
In order to have longevity in the profession, and to make sure that we keep enjoying the work that we do and keep providing top-notch quality service to our clients. So, Robin, let's start with what should legal aid solicitors and staff expect if they are going in to provide legal assistance to disaster-affected clients, or whether it's a disaster recovery centre or via phone.
The first thing is accept that you're going to be dealing with distressed people and that they're going to be emotional, but that you are going to give them really good practical assistance that can take some of the worries away from them. You can't and won't solve all their life problems, and you can't deal with the grief issues that might have come in the situation. So the first thing is to be proud of yourself for doing this work. If you've made yourself available to step in and do this for clients, it's actually what the positive psychology world calls meaningful work, where you're actually deploying your skills to assist others. And if you're consciously aware of that while you're doing it, that actually keeps your brain from being alarmed and keeps you better at thinking about what else you need to do for the client. That's the second point. Keep your focus on the client while you're talking with them. Have done your care for yourself before you get there. So, as I think I mentioned earlier, just calm yourself a bit down before you have an interaction. Try and have a quick break between each one if that's possible. Get the file of the client in front of you so you know which one you're talking about, because after you've talked to 3 or 4 of these in a day, they're all starting to sound a bit the same. And keep in mind what you're trying to understand or needing to extract from the client to better be able to assist them. And that keeps you in left brain and keeps you professional. But that doesn't mean that you're not being actively kind towards the client and concerned about their distress. And the way I've done it over 41 years is I've usually thought, what would I like someone else to do for me in this circumstance, or someone I care about? And if I do that and I keep my focus on them, then I know what I need to do to keep us both safe and continue the conversation on helpfully. So having just told everybody not to get too much of the story, there is also some benefit from the great trauma writer Judith Herman talks about the importance of bearing witness to what's happened to people. And that's what you guys are doing. You're bearing witness, you're getting the story, and then you're trying to get the community to respond and get the resources that the clients need to respond, or whatever legal remedies there are. And Judith Herman has long said that if someone knows what's happened to the client, is willing to understand their distress and then assist them, that in and of itself is helpful. So if they just get a kind response from you, you're halfway there. If they get a good technical response from you where you actually do your job, you're 150% there. So just keep focused on what you're there for. Keep your legal aid hat on, and then just keep thinking, okay, what does that mean I need to do for this client in that circumstance? And that should keep the conversation on track and get you both to where they need to be by the end of the conversation. You do need to, it's better if you kind of try and keep some intermittent eye contact so that you can see any tracking changes in their emotions and adjust your own tone if they're getting distressed, or pass the tissues if you need to, or that kind of stuff. But don't stare these guys out. And you need to not have given too many ideas at a time. So just move it through slowly and keep checking for understanding, because their attention isn't good, and their attention to detail and their memory isn't good at this time. And so one of the ways you can know that is that you start to lose the plot yourself a bit. And if your mind starts to wander and you've forgotten that maybe where in the story you are, then just stop, sum up a little bit, make sure you got the right story, and then proceed. And then that should keep you both on track, so that you're clear you've got this client's story, you've worked out what they need, and you've kept you both of you calm through the conversation.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Robin. So can you now talk a little bit more about what solicitors can do to look after themselves during service provision and after dealing with traumatised clients?
Yep. Okay, so first of all, I need to go back a step even, that if we know this is part of your role, you need to be actively looking after your wellbeing before you find yourself in the call centre or with the client in front of you. And it's all the basics that most of you from Legal Aid have heard me talk about ad nauseum, starting with your sleep, do your good diet, do some exercise on a regular basis, all of the wellbeing things that you've heard 1,000 times. If you're going to do trauma work, you need to be doing those things on a daily basis for yourself, so that if you suddenly find yourself on the end of the phone or thrust in front of a distressed client, you're coming off a good base. So that needs to be part of your mentality about how you approach this work. The second one is what I've already alluded to: stay in role. Quickly get into role and work out what somebody in your role needs to be doing for anybody telling you the story they're telling you at the moment. And stay in your legal role. Do resist that accidental counsellor role. And again, as I think I've already mentioned, try and pre-incident know who the local other services are, know who the clients can be referred to for counselling, know what other assistance they can get where they are, and have those phone numbers and brochures and those numbers with you if possible, so that you can give those to the client when you're finished, and you know that those other things can be being dealt with for them as well. And then when it's over, sometimes each situation affects us all differently, and we, like the clients, don't know what our own triggers are. But just if possible, take a few minutes after that interaction and check in with yourself. And go, okay, how did that go? How am I feeling about it at the moment? Is there an aspect of it that's really worrying me, or that I can't get out of my head? Do I need to speak to someone to just get some basic grounding, or can I do it for myself? And again, years ago, and I don't know if we still got the document, but years ago we had a self-diffusing thing that we gave staff at Legal Aid that was on their desk, and it says things like breathe, stand up and move around, make a cup of coffee if you need it. If you do a mindfulness technique, then do it now. And then after all of that, am I still distressed? Then I need to speak to someone. Who would that be? Do you call a buddy that's doing the work with you? Do you call EAP? Have some options around that, and just have a quick diffuse with that person if your normal grounding things aren't working for you. But for most of us, if we check in with ourselves after each one and just reset, ready for the next one, and then do that quickly after each one, and then just check with yourself at the end of the day before you leave to go home. So if you're driving, make sure you're ready to drive. Are you able to do the drive for the distance you've got on the roads you're going? If not, maybe stop and have a meal first and just get your blood sugars up a bit better and calm yourself. If there's more than one of you, see who's in better shape to drive and make that decision. And that can often be a time workers tell me that they do the debrief at the end of the day, have a chat with each other in the car, getting back to the hotel or getting to the next location. And that's kind of a natural way of diffusing the day and being able to get it out of your head. But if all of the above isn't assisting, then again, know who to call through Legal Aid, whether it's your supervisor, whether it's EAP, and have a more formal chat with someone that can help you if you've really got something stuck in your brain. So it's basically do for yourself what you would do for somebody else. Do your own mental health first aid, recognising you've just done something that's skillful and difficult. Also, congratulate yourself for doing that. Instead of focusing on the negative of the day, just go, well, I think I helped a few people today. And I'm really glad we were able to come and do this today for these clients. And think about what you've learnt from the day too. If you deployed a new skill, you tried something that hasn't worked before, the client's been really happy with something, reflect on that, because again, that gets you back into left brain. And you're not just focusing on the bad, you're actually focusing on doing a difficult job well. And that calms you down and should stand you in good stead at the end of the day. And then make sure you get some sleep that night. Do not get yourself drunk. Eat good, healthy food that evening. Go to bed at a reasonable time, preferably after maybe some exercise where you can sweat it out of you a little bit and just break up those trauma chemicals that have built up across the day. And whether that's a swim or a jog or a dance or whatever you do. And even just a good stretch to help break up the chemicals and get them into your bloodstream so that you can get rid of those and they're not building up, particularly if you're there for a few weeks and you're in the middle of a campaign with clients coming in every day. Try and offload each day's leftovers on that day so that you're not having build up.
So I had another question for you, Robin. We wanted to ask you, what are some of the things we need to be aware of and mindful of when we do want to talk about how our day's been, or we want to talk about some of the things that we've heard from our clients that are quite disturbing and traumatic. Can you tell us a bit about how we can sort of make sure we're not traumatizing other people and traumatizing ourselves by the repetition of stories?
Yep, that's a really good one. The story I usually tell about this is Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor, who sent a team of his fellow researchers to interview his fellow Holocaust survivors as soon as they were released. And by the time the researchers ended up getting all the stories from the survivors, they had worse trauma symptoms than the survivors did, because they weren't deploying their fight, flight, fright to deal with the situation. They were just hearing story after story after story. And listening to it, and their brain just kept alarming about each story. The other thing was, I think I mentioned before, repressors and emoters. And us emoters are usually wandering the hallways wanting to talk to someone about what's just happened in our day, in the misguided belief that talking about it in and of itself will help us. But there is actually that notion of neural kindling that I talked about in regard to the clients before, that we're the same. If we keep talking about it without a view to resolving it, understanding what happened or make a decision about it, then we're just making it worse and more likely to stick in our brain than if we had not spoken about it. So the reasons for, so there's two things. Well, let's back up. There's one. First of all, if you are going to talk to anyone, particularly if it's a colleague who's just a colleague like you and isn't EAP or isn't a counsellor, seek informed consent first. Say to your colleague, I'm about to dump on you because I've had a terrible day. Are you up for it? Because undoubtedly you've gone to your oppressing colleague who doesn't have reciprocal rights with you. And if you are the receiving end, the repressor colleague that's been come to and asked that, can I say to you, actually go, no, I've had 4 of you today. Could you try the repressor down the hall, please? Feel free not to take a dump from your colleague if you're not up for it, because you're not going to give them a reciprocal one because you don't talk about it. So let's be careful of our colleagues in this regard and think about who we are going to talk about it. And we should really only be talking about it if it's distressing in a way that we don't understand and we need to make sense of it, or we think we've made a wrong decision and we need to run it by someone to think if there's something else that needs to be done for the client, or we're seeking a referral to talk to somebody about it. We shouldn't be having long, gory conversations with each other, which the legal profession has been fantastic at for its entire existence, and really good at telling war stories. And then everyone goes home having nightmares about your client. So why do you want to talk about it? Talk until you get it understood or a different decision made. And once you're there, shut up. And then going through that, seek consent. So you're better to go to paid ears, to your EAP people, to previously selected senior staff who you know how to guide you through a helpful conversation, or your own counsellor or your own GP might all be better options than a colleague, because they will try and bring you to a conclusion that makes it better for you. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. Are you able to talk a little bit about addiction to chaos and how that might play out in this context?
Yeah, an addiction to adrenaline in particular behind that. We like being, some of us anyway, and people who are drawn to this work, like to feel competent in dangerous and difficult situations, and you've only got to watch that ridiculous show SAS to see that. And remember that each time we've had a difficult conversation or a difficult interaction or a horrible story, adrenaline is pumping in our system. And adrenaline is addictive. It's what makes people gamblers, and it's what makes people drive fast cars, and it's what makes people have affairs. And actually all of those things have been connected to vicarious trauma. Because if we get addicted to the adrenaline, being busy in the heat of the moment, being good at it, then we go looking for trouble elsewhere outside work. And one way is talking about it, but one way is driving the car too fast on the way home. Another way is to go and blow some money at the casino because that seems like a good thing to do. And if you look at the history where lawyers have publicly gone wrong over the years, they've been doing something silly that seemed like a good idea at the time to a very bright brain, but it was really just that adrenaline addiction that's got them into trouble. And if we're not careful, it can have us doing risky things on weekends. It can have us thinking affairs are good ideas when we've got a perfectly good relationship. It can have us reaching for alcohol to try and manage it. So we really only need to be indulging ourselves in this difficult stuff again to better understand it, to calm it down, and then to redirect to other things. So another mechanism that can help there that we haven't talked about yet, but I think everyone that does this work should have a mindfulness practice. So that you learn, and by mindfulness practice, I mean a practice where you learn how your own mind works, you learn how to focus on something that can calm you down and redirect you to other things when you've gotten over-involved in the chaos or the drama of the story, and make you think about something nicer and calmer. And that's easier to do in the heat of the moment if you have a daily mindfulness practice, so that you can actually hear yourself revving up about it to someone else and go, actually, I don't need to do this. And either change the subject yourself or ask your listener to change the subject. And you'd be better off going for a walk than chewing the ear of your client in that situation. So mindfulness is the other way we can get whether that's what we're doing. And we can discern whether the conversation we're seeking is a helpful one, or we're just revved up and we want to keep it going because we like that revved up feeling. If you're a perfectionist, that's even worse. And the other group of people we have to watch with this are the adrenaline junkie perfectionists. And you're going to have to really rein yourself in here, because there's no perfect response to a disaster. There's no program we can roll out for the clients that meets all of their needs. There's nothing we can offer that makes all of the clients happy. There are some clients we have to turn away. So if you've got perfectionism on top of all of that, you're going to constantly be feeling like you haven't given the client what they need, and then you're going to rev yourself up about that, and you're possibly going to isolate yourself from your colleagues by criticising what's going on unnecessarily and unfairly, and isolation is the last place you want to be here, and you'll burn yourself out. So if that's another element of your particular psyche, I've repeatedly over the years tried to direct you all to read a book called The Pursuit of Perfect by Tal Ben-Shahar. You can find an online version, get the book, do the program, get that one off the plate, because there's nothing perfect about disaster work. It's an ever evolving thing we learn how to do, and we get better at it hopefully every season, but we forget something every season. We fail to respond to something every season that we didn't think was going to happen. And if we get too caught up in that because the adrenaline is making us go, I didn't get that right and stuff, then we're just going to really burn all the energy on that and not actually learn from the lessons so that we do it better next time. And that's all anybody can ask of us in this, because it's an ever-evolving field, and there's always something in disaster that no one expected. And you'll burn out really quickly if you don't kill the perfectionism. Sorry, personal bugbear of mine. I just thought I'd put it in there. Good.
Excellent, thank you. I think that's a really important point to make, and I think for a lot of us who might function like that, we're not always aware when that's coming into effect. And this sort of work, if that's something that's sort of there in the background, would definitely trigger that sort of response. So thank you for talking about that.
And it just occurred to me that this kind of work attracts the control freak, right? Because you're trying to make the world better and you're trying to fix things, and it just makes the work harder. As I said, because we don't, there's no perfect response, and what's perfect for one client is not going to be good enough for another. So then in that case, then you put yourself at risk of the perpetual roller coaster, of feeling good about what you did for this client, but feeling shit about what you did for that client. Sorry, edit the shit out. You see my point. I'll stop at that point. Fahana, ask me something.
I was interested to know, just coming back again to how resistant some people can be to those words like mindfulness or, go to your EAPs and all that thing. Robin doesn't mean mindfulness and you have to sit on a meditation pillow in a quiet room for an hour to be mindful.
Yeah, I was also thinking in line with that. I was having a conversation with a solicitor last week, and we spoke about the importance of not waiting till you're burnt out.
Yeah.
And you spoke about that, but I think generally a lot of people push themselves right to the edges. We're talking about that, pushing yourself right to the edges, working long hours, working weekends, and pushing until you're just absolutely exhausted. Yeah, maybe that's something you can talk about, where it's mindfulness, exercise, going away on holidays, going away on little trips, the importance of how that buffers the impact of doing this sort of work. You may not see it straight away, but I think it keeps people in good stead.
Yeah. And that actually is, mindfulness brings all that together, because mindfulness isn't about sitting on a cushion for hours a day. It's actually about knowing where your mind's at any particular point in time. And when you're doing such triggering work that feels like it can never be done because the clients are so distressed and you're trying to offer so much from good intent to people, then it's hard. Then you think you're doing the right thing when everyone else is looking at you as burnout material. At the very beginning of that, there's actually a cool little technique called the third space by Adam Fraser, which he doesn't tout as mindfulness, but I think is. So the idea is the first space is the thing you've just been doing. You've just had the interview with a really distressed client. The second space might be you've got the choice of a break or seeing another client, or there's a phone call coming in. You take seconds or minutes in between those two spaces to put a third space, where you just check in with yourself, see how you're traveling, make a cup of coffee perhaps, do a little breathing technique, and then get yourself ready for the next thing you have to do. So when you don't have a lot of time during a day, that's one way you can do it, to just get your head out of that client, get your head into the next client. And the 3 steps of that are reflect what was just happening. What am I telling myself was happening about that? And it might be that you've done a bad job or you didn't do enough or whatever. Is there anything else I need to do about it? Rest, just sit and breathe quietly, make a cup of coffee, go for a walk around the building, and then reset for the next task you have to do, whether it's administrative or travel or see the next client. And that actually, in and of itself, in my mind, is mindfulness, because it's about being where you are and doing what you're doing right now, and not dragging the distress of the last one into the next one, and not being the next one impatient or worried about the next one you have to see. And that will save energy. And then if you could do some longer versions of that, one at the beginning of the day and one at the end of the day, perhaps one in the middle of the day, where you do go for the walk, where you go for the drive, where you give yourself something nice to eat, or you do a longer mindfulness technique, then that pretty much is all you would need to do on most days, actually, to just get your brain back. And when you're regularly doing that, you'll know whether you've hit a day or a client where this one has triggered you somehow. And those are the ones you then need to seek assistance from other people with, if that makes sense. So there's a website called The Third Space. A lot of people are using that for going from office to court and back again, whenever we're able to do that again on a regular basis at the moment. He intended it originally for the commute, so that on the way from home to work, or in this case on the way from hotel to the visitor centre that you're going to do the work, get your mind out of what happened in the hotel last night or what the family said over the phone, and get your mind on the list for today and what you think you're doing today. So you walk into work ready to do it with your mind out of home. And then at the end of the day, okay, run through what you've done for the day, anything you need to do about any of them now. When the supervisor picks something up, go back to the file, whatever, and then put your mind on where you're going to now, and what you want for dinner or who you're going to see, and you just manually change your brain. And that is just a really simple way you can do mindfulness that will give you a chance to know how any particular day is affecting you. And if you're still not calm after that, then that's the day you pick the phone up and talk to someone.
I think that's what it's about. It's about saying it's okay, we're human beings.
Yeah.
And linking that into your mindfulness, what you were talking about with mindfulness, it's all about being present and not doing too many things. And when we're not mindful, we're usually on the other end, we're doing too many things, thinking about too many things. Whereas if we can be mindful and just focusing on what we're doing, the one thing we're doing at that time, sort of alleviates us from all the other stresses that are sort of surrounding us, but we don't have to deal with right away.
Yep. You raised a couple of things actually that I think we probably should tease out of that. One is that one of the sure signs of vicarious trauma is rescue mentality, and that you keep pushing yourself to do more because you're responding now to your distress, not to what's actually needed. And that's a surefire way to burnout. And you getting sick, and you really suddenly have to stop because you've suddenly run out of steam because you're ignoring all the other signs.
Do you think we can go into a little bit about that rescuing mentality? Is that sort of like an over responsibility, like carrying the world on your shoulders?
Yeah. That's exactly what it is, and it's got several permutations. The one is you're extending the day. You're trying to cram more people in than you should be seeing. You're there early. You're still there late. You're not having lunch. You don't feel you can have a break to regenerate yourself because the need's so great. It can also manifest itself by being critical of what everyone else is doing. No one else is doing enough. And whether that's your colleagues or other teams or other government agencies involved, you can kind of get cynical and critical about everybody else, which ends up isolating you because everyone thinks you're a know-it-all. And you can get caught up in kind of give up cynical response, which the law is also very famous for. And this one is just turning up, doing as little as you can, dodging a few of the more distressing interviews, missing meetings, and just trying to run under the radar because you're now too distressed to do it, or you don't believe the system's responding properly to people. And of course, neither of those is helpful. And this comes back to the good enough approach again, that we have to understand that you're doing the best you can under the circumstances. The system is doing the best it can under the circumstances. And if there is something really wrong with how it's responding, write it down, keep a note of it, And when there are meetings or when this particular disaster is over, bring it to the table and say, hey guys, how can we do this better next time? But we know we're caught into the emotional baggage of it when we start like that little rat on the wheel, running, trying to fix it for everybody. And we're the only one that sees that it's wrong and no one else gets it. And then the clients all come to us and then it all gets worse. So it's a real, both of those are classic symptoms of vicarious trauma. And that's, again, mindfulness is the way to see them happening, or other people are saying to you, wait a minute, that was way over the top of a response to that. What's happening with you? We need to listen to our colleagues when they're not getting up there in outrage street as far as we are. They're probably right and we're probably wrong and needing to just calm down a bit and get some self-care in, probably get some sleep. So to sum up, in terms of self-care, main ingredients are your own physical well-being. Diet, sleep, exercise all matter. If you add in a mindfulness technique where you know how your own mind works and you can quickly use one of those throughout a day, and the third space is as good a place to start as any if you don't have one. Ruby Wax has got all sorts of mobile, movable techniques you can do sitting at your desk if you want to have a look at some of those. So your own self-care, put the oxygen on yourself first before going into a disaster. It's the classic disaster response. You can't save anybody if you're going under. So as a habit, if you know this is a component of your work, this should be a very critical daily part of your self-care. Secondly, don't do it alone. So have supportive relationships with other people. Make sure you're keeping good relationships with your team and with whatever other agencies are on the ground where you are. Nurture those relationships and understand that between you, you've got it. No one agency has to respond to everything that the client needs. But find out what the other agencies are offering, have good relationships with them, have your referral information, and collaborate with the work. Thirdly, I don't count very well, people get hot under the collar. If there are rifts between staff or across agencies, fix them, because you can't manage vicarious trauma if you're fighting with everyone. So where that adrenaline gets out of hand and you might have snapped at somebody, apologise at the end of the day, sort it out, and get that conflict dealt with so that all parties are safe. And then think about ongoing, regular, supportive relationships like social workers and psychologists do, who are doing this work, where we have to talk to someone outside the work to see how we're travelling, to help us think of more things we need to do to look after ourselves, and to see how we're sounding about the work. And then I think, Hannah, you mentioned it earlier before too, breaks are really important, whether it's throughout a day, throughout a week, or after a stint of really busy work, have your holiday. None of us are indispensable. And in fact, Charles Figley, the guy that originally wrote about vicarious trauma, he called it compassion fatigue back in 1995. He says it takes about, if you have one traumatic incident that you're involved in, it takes a month for your body to get rid of those chemicals. And it gets rid of those chemicals best if it's not thinking about them, not doing them, and is away from them and doing completely other things. Because remember I said earlier also, the thought is the same as the activity to the brain. So to maintain this long term, you need breaks, and occasionally you might need longer breaks. I'm noticing in the refugee space, I work with a number of the refugee community legal centres. There seems to be a habit there where they're taking sabbaticals every couple of years, and they either go travelling or they go into an academic role for a period of time and come away from the front line for a while. And if after that break they still have a passion for the work, then they come back. If on that break they think, yeah, no, I can't be asked to go back, they stay where they are or they redirect somewhere else. And that's a really sensible thing to keep in mind too. Don't do this work long term without having broken it up, tried some other stuff, and giving yourself some time away from it. And if you do lose your passion and enthusiasm for it, it's time to leave without guilt, being proud of what you've done, and hand the baton on to someone else, and they can do it for a while. And that way we keep the field energised and we keep the clients getting really good service, and we stop burning well-meaning, hard-working lawyers out at the rate we currently are. And we really do need to stop that. And do we stress enough that I think I did mention at the beginning that they are doing a very important job, and they need to be proud of it, and they're doing it on behalf of the rest of us. So keep that in mind, because that's a really good antidote to the vicarious trauma, is that right living idea. And everybody who's voluntarily stepping into this work should be proud of it. Is getting life skills for other situations that'll stand you in great stead. And there's also that potential for post-traumatic growth that we don't talk about enough. Doing a difficult job well for the right reasons and very lousy pay is definitely post-traumatic growth.
Well, thank you so much, Robin, for an incredibly informative and enlightening presentation. I think a lot of people will benefit from it. Do you have any other last words of wisdom to share with the rest of us?
Well, I've always been doubtful that I've had any words of wisdom, Farhana, but I would like to give my own personal thanks to everyone for doing the work that you're doing. And I've gone into disaster scenes on the night, and I know what it's like, and I know how stupid it feels to be going towards a fire instead of out of a fire, and to put yourself in the way of dealing with distressed people. So the work you're all doing is really important, and you do it on behalf of the rest of us. I'm too old to do it anymore, so I'm grateful you guys are doing it, and be proud of that, and be proud of each other and support each other in doing that work. And just remember, in all trauma work, make sure the oxygen's on you first before you assist others. You cannot do it unless you look after yourself properly. That'll make you better able to look out for your colleagues, and that'll make all of you do a better job for the clients, which I know is what you're striving to do. So thank you very much for your efforts in that direction. And if any of this was helpful, I'm pleased. Thank you for having me.
The only thing I was going to say to you when you were talking about perfectionism, one of my first counsellors, she said, have you ever thought about maybe you being a perfectionist? And I said, in full seriousness, I am not a perfectionist. I've never done anything perfectly. And I stared at her for so long, going, how could I be?
You should put that in somewhere.
Until I understood what that meant.